Ecstatic Bliss. Secrets to living a juicy life. Pain is certain. Suffering is optional. That's a very popular saying of Buddha. And I would like to talk about this topic of suffering, be it physically, be it emotionally, be it psychologically, mentally. Actually, all types are always connected, because when we internally suffer, it manifests outside into physical pain or suffering. And this topic is a very important topic on the spiritual path of the ascension journey, when we, yes, either consciously or unconsciously are on that path to liberation, because liberation in a way means being free from suffering. And Buddha was a very dominant, important figure in explaining, philosophizing about what is suffering and how to stop it, how to end it, and also what you can do practically. I'm diving a little bit into that, but also share, as always, my own opinion, my own insights from it, so you can take away whatever resonates with you and yes, feel into what you actually can do now to alleviate, to become more free from this feeling of suffering if you are currently in a state of pain or suffering. And first of all, obviously, and that is also what the first part of this Buddha saying is, pain is certain because it is part of life. Yeah, it is part of our journey here on earth to explore both sides of duality, of the high vibe and the low vibe, and to actually see both sides in the end as one, as totality. So pain as well also is a way of being separate from your own truth, from your own self, from your greatness, from your wholeness. But yes, it's an acceptance that pain, no matter how spiritual you are, no matter how many practices you do or how rigidly and disciplined you practice, no matter on which level you are on your journey, there will be phases or glimpses of pain, and the pain is only seen in a different light, really. It's seen from a lightful perspective and not from a harsh and victimhood perspective. Yes. And it's also more about letting pain and all other emotions transition through you without clinging to it, without resisting it, and without making stories of it. But I will come to that also when I talk about more what I see the causes of pain. So Buddha, coming to him again, had something that was called, or is called still, the 4 pillars of the 4 noble truths. So not 4 pillars, but the 4 noble truths. And they are all related to suffering. It's kind of like a framework to understand suffering and the way out of it into nirvana, which is in a way the goal of many people, consciously or unconsciously. Yes? So it's a framework of understanding the true nature of suffering. And this path includes the first truth that suffering is inevitable, which I come to when I reflect on it, which I would say suffering, because he even says this, suffering is optional. So I feel suffering is not part of our journey. It's pain, but not suffering. More on this later. And then the second truth is that in his view, the main reason, the main cause for suffering is attachment, clinging on to something, mainly to desires. And the third truth is that Suffering ends when you detach. So obviously the opposite of attachment is detachment. And I also have one episode about detachment. If you are more interested into that, then I advise you to watch or listen to that. And that non-attachment leads to liberation, leads eventually to nirvana. And then in the fourth noble truth, he gives suggestions in a path kind of way, what you can actively do to get out of attachment, which are not only non-attachment, but also some similarities with the 10 commandments, like rightful speech, ethic and moral actions, positive mindset, mindfulness, awareness, things like that. So these are according to Buddha. And if you're more interested into that, then I really suggest you dive into his teachings, into books, or what you find online nowadays. It's really, really worth reading and putting your mind into. And my personal reflection on suffering is really that, yes, attachment is one reason, but mainly if we go to the roots, our mind is the cause of suffering. If we don't put our mind into any emotion, it's just an emotion. It is what it is. Again, also with a thought, because from a thought and from an emotion and from a body sensation, from all those three, suffering can arise when our mind gets into it. When we first, yes, attach to it, when we cling to something and don't let go, it's in a way, you've noticed that if you focus too much on one thought, on one emotion, on one body sensation, it just becomes bigger. Where your focus goes, energy flows. That's interplaying here. So somehow you nourish it by giving your attention, by giving your focus and your mind in that sense to it. So attaching to that pain. And also attaching to that pain by labeling it as a pain. Yes. So putting a label on something is an attachment. If you loosen it, if you just see it as it is, then suffering will not happen as such. You will feel it, yes, but it's about feeling it through without putting that label of it's so hurtful, it's so painful, it's tearing me apart, it's suffering, I'm a victim of it, and so forth. That's the first thing from the mind. And the second aspect, also stemming from the mind and related to attachment, is resistance. When we attach to something, we cling to something, so we don't let the natural course of life flow through us. And resistance is exactly also the same of resisting that flow. So if we see from a higher perspective that the divine wants to experience itself through us by feeling alive, which means all sorts of emotions, then resistance means, in a way, resisting the divine will. And the more you resist the divine will, the more you will actually suffer. And once you drop the attachment, once you drop the resistance and let life flow through you naturally without force, so it's without clinging to it and without pushing it away. Attachment is clinging, resistance is pushing it away. Without both of them, so with neither of them, suffering will not happen in the way you may have experienced. Yeah, and maybe also to make it more practical, you can always look back in your life, or maybe you're currently in a situation in one life area where you feel it's feeling like suffering, that you take your own specific example and look, am I attaching to something? Am I clinging, holding on to it? Am I labeling it all the time? Am I making a story of it? That's the next point, actually. The mind is good. You know that I talk a lot about identities, finding your essence and truth. And writing your own story, and we are good at writing stories. Everything actually in humanity gets more vivid by stories. And we also write our own personal story here in life. But if we attach a certain story of victimhood, of suffering to something, which is actually also a label, but with more elaborative imagery, then it becomes suffering. And stories are also created by the mind. So that's the third factor: attachment, resistance, stories, and in a way also judgment. Yeah, that's in all. I mean, all of what I share is interconnected, but you can also see it separately. So judgment also is coming from the mind. You judge it as good or bad, as happiness or pain, as fulfillment or suffering. That's our duality. The duality of life, the polarity also, if you want to frame it a bit more positively. And judgment hinders you also to let life flow through you and see everything as one. Judgment separates you from truth. Judgment gives you just one narrowed view on yourself and of the divine. And even, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be you who is suffering. Maybe you're also observing others suffering or animals suffering, yes? The world, the earth suffering from humanity. But always it's a judgment. And always also it's in a way the resistance of, again, letting life flow through you, letting the divine experience itself through you. I know there's always a fine line of what do I accept then and what do I reframe or transition out to, because it doesn't really necessarily mean to endure everything that is put onto you, especially if it comes to interactions, boundary crossings, yes, like outer forces. But you can always, if you go into neutrality at least, you don't have to label it in a positive way, but neutralize it. And then, because neutralization helps you to detach, to detach and see that what happens to you, with you, from a higher perspective, a third eye perspective, a bird's eye perspective, or even the perspective of the divine. And the gift behind it, the learning from it. What is it that I need to go through to realize something about myself, about a higher truth of myself, and stepping more into my essence? So judgment is that part of separation, of duality. Its ending would be coming into non-duality, into oneness, ending separation. And the last aspect, also coming from the mind, is not living in the present moment. Probably you have often heard or read, and Eckhart Tolle is a wonderful teacher of the power of now, that this single moment now contains everything and is fulfilled. In the here and now, we are happy. There's nothing to complete its whole. And when we are suffering, we are very often, check in with yourself, either in the past, replaying old stories, or maybe clinging on to something, clinging on to someone, or labeling in a way also, judging what happened, being resentful, being in the what would be if, what could have happened if, those scenarios, replaying if it could be different. Or we are in the future wishing for something else, also in stories. Yeah, you see how everything is interconnected. So these are my reflections actually. And maybe, yes, maybe Buddha meant everything with that also in the term of attachment, because he's really focusing on attachment. And I would split it into attachment, judgment, telling stories, resistance. So not letting life flow through you, not letting the divine experience itself through you how it wants, which is actually you, if you detach from your ego and identity. And clinging to the past or future, which is not living in the present moment. And all those causes, those reasons for suffering, obviously you can reverse, and then you have the solutions how you can end suffering. Detach, non-judgment, not making stories, seeing as it is, living, being in the present moment, mindfulness, awareness, and non-resistance. Yes, so letting life flow through you, flowing with the waves. And yes, cognitively you may understand it, but it takes time. So I also remind you of being gentle with yourself and curious about your own path. That we can always remind ourselves of, because I know sometimes we get under pressure of ourselves. For example, oh, I want to manage this, I don't want to suffer anymore. But once you get into this spiral, then actually you focus again too much on your suffering, on your pain, and you won't get into the ending of it, into liberation. And it's not so much about getting it now, it's a journey. It's a lifelong, over lifetimes journey. And actually, there's also nothing to lose and nothing to win, nothing important. And I most probably will also do an episode about this, because when you come to the point of actually nothing really matters, and I could just die also right away here, I've done everything. I'm fine. I know when I die, I've experienced everything that my soul came here for experience. Then it brings a deep-rooted peace. And that for me is actually also living in peace is also the end of suffering. And that is the sense of everything is what it is. Nothing is really important. Nothing really matters. But still, I'm curious about life. Yeah, because otherwise it becomes a spiritual bypassing of I want to get to liberation, I want to get to enlightenment, to nirvana, to samadhi, however you want to call it, without recognizing, hey, you came here as a human being. So it's about integrating all aspects, all dimensions. That's for today, a little bit more heavy maybe today, but I feel this is a very, very important topic if you're on that path, really dedicated. It's nothing maybe for those who just feel like, oh, I do my spiritual practices just to feel more healthy or feel more in balance. That's an in-between step. But I know here also, I mean, if you follow me, you have already the seeds inside of you to really dig deep and want to come far on your journey, in the sense of your soul is seeking something beyond the mundane. All right. Let me know if you have any questions or further additions to it in the comments if you watch this on YouTube. Otherwise, also feel free to connect in any form with me, any way you wish. All links you find in the show notes description below, as always. And I see you next time. Much love and end of suffering.